The show you're about to see replaces, of course, the non-league roundup show tonight. My good friend, um, Anthony Hughes, chairman of the Southern League, passed away, as you know, um, last week in a shock to us all. Um, this show was recorded back in the COVID times, shall we say, where I got the opportunity to speak to the boss, as I called him, for about an hour on his career, from when he first started in football, um, to just before he became the chairman of the Southern League, where he talks about his illness, first time around. He talks about his life with Merthyr Tydfil. He talks about his life with his family too. In a fantastic interview with him. We spent ages before the interview talking, as normal, as you do when you speak to Anthony. And of course, we spoke for a long time afterwards. My life this week has been turned upside down by the loss of the man that was an inspiration to me in the last 2 or 3 years of meeting him. I've seen many of people turn around and say that this gentleman, you met him for 5 minutes and you felt like you'd known him for a lifetime. For me, life in football will never be the same. Losing a great friend and an inspiration. I hope you enjoy this. Please make sure you share this as well with all your friends and contacts, because this is a great, great interview with a dear friend. Rest in peace, my friend, and love to all the family.
Welcome to another My Life in Football. And it seems like it's been a bit of time since we've done this with COVID and everything else that we've done it. But wow, what a way to come back and to actually get the chance to talk to a man that I met probably only, 6 months ago, probably less than that, via Zoom. And now probably he's one of the gentlemen that I've got the most time for now in non-league football. And a massive welcome to the Southern League Vice Chairman, Mr. Anthony Hughes.
Thank you, Dave. That's very kind of you. Yeah, I've enjoyed being with you.
So, Anthony, I mean, one thing, I suppose, just to start with, I suppose, is, with COVID sort of hitting everything in the last 18 months and so forth, and then, the major restructure. It'd be interesting just to get your thoughts on that sort of restructure before we go into your career. But I mean, I know Harlow are going to come and join you this season, which I'm over the moon about. So, but
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Was you expecting as a bigger shuffle as it turned out to be? And when we last spoke, I don't think you was even expecting to even have a revamp this year.
No, you're right. I'll be honest with you, Dave. You're quite right. It's funny how things work out. COVID has been a nightmare, obviously, for everybody. And it's a far bigger problem of football, that's for sure. But this is something that's become a bit of a bright light at the end of a long, hard road. It's fair to say the leagues at step 3 and 4 thought it would just be delayed for another year. We assumed it would be delayed for another year. But I suppose the real drive came from steps 5 and 6 and the leagues committee, and we got to see how much they wanted it to happen. And we became aware of the bottleneck at the bottom of the pyramid that probably needed addressing. So that gave it the initial impetus. And once they gave it the initial impetus, we were more than happy to go along with it. Who were we to stop it? We weren't being adversely affected by it really in any way, shape, or form. And you know, as I tell everybody now, it's the one thing we've done this year that I hear no criticism of. You know, everybody seems to be on board with the fact that the decision that was taken to do it now seems to be a very positive move, and in non-league football, I think everybody's delighted that it's actually gone ahead. So it's been a very good move. When we sat down to divide the leagues up, it became evident that our footprint would change slightly. In the south and west, it's very difficult to alter that. That's more or less stays the same because there's vast distances just because you're on the extremities of the country. But certainly our second division at step 4 has become a lot tighter, a lot less travelling, and covers a slightly different footprint now, which incorporates yourselves in Harlow and a lot of the other clubs around there, like FC Romania and Waltham Forest, and I'm really interested and looking forward to that, to be honest. Yeah, so yeah, we're quite excited about it. We've actually got only 3 new clubs from Step 5, but we've inherited 5 from the Isthmian League, and inevitably, unfortunately, lost a number of clubs to Northern Premier League, clubs that, you know, we enjoyed working with. So, but I think on the whole, and I've spoken to some of the clubs that's left the Southern League to go to the Northern Premier League, they've been quite pleased with how their division has been constituted, which still enables it to be like a Midlands division, if you like. We've managed to keep that third Northern Premier League division as a sort of Central Midlands division. So I think they are fairly happy with the outcome as well. So hopefully, in the main, most people are quite pleased with the outcome. We certainly are. Yes.
I suppose the one request from me would be, you know, when you do the League Cup draw this year, that if you could do your best not to draw us away to Truro on a Tuesday night, would be quite nice.
We do regionalise it, I promise you. You might get there eventually, but hopefully it'll take a while. No, it's a fair point. It's a fair point. It is difficult, you know, it's a difficult one, isn't it? There are certain clubs on the extremities of things, and poor old Truro, you know, people say to me, "Oh, Truro, how are they in our league?" I say, "Hang on a minute now. You only got to go there once. They've got to travel 21 times."
Yeah,
you know, so listen, you know, we've got to make it inclusive, and it's great that football is stretching into the extremities now. That's where we want it to be.
I think one of the other funny things that came out of the whole restructure was I know that you know, my club were looking forward to a trip to Guernsey one day, and of course they were never in our league, and then we get moved out of the league that we're in, and they get moved in.
Is that right? Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I can imagine that's a great experience. Yeah, I bet I'd be looking forward to that as well. Yeah,
but there you go. Not to worry.
Never mind. So, you might get to Wales instead.
Absolutely. Yeah, lovely Wales. I'd enjoy that trip. But in all fairness, though, I mean, so where did the non-leagues, you know, where did your love for non-league? I mean, where did you first start off in football and non-league? Where was your sort of first starting day?
Yeah, always Merthyr Tydfil. Yeah, my dad was ever present there. So I can't remember a time when I haven't been there. So I'm talking 3 or 4. Kicking a ball at the side of the pitch, you know. So for me, I was entrenched in the Southern League. I was, from the time I went to Merthyr, probably late 60s, Merthyr were in the Southern League, and they stayed in the Southern League then until when I was late into my 30s. You know, so I've been a Southern League man. I was at 15 and 16 badgering Dennis Strudwick for results on a Tuesday night, you know, by phone, and I've spoken to Dennis about this since, because we've become good friends and worked together, and it must have been a real pain to him how he ever had the patience to put up with the likes of me, and there were probably a few others, but I was one of these anoraks who was ringing him every night for results before the days of mobile phones and everything, before CFAX probably as well. So yeah, it was always Merthyr. I was there from a very, very young age, my friend, you know, and I ended up then becoming involved with the club probably when I was about 12. And I took over one of the turnstiles, you know, so I was on the turnstile from the age of 12, and that carried on for 3 years. Then I took over the program and just generally got entrenched in the club, really.
So was that sort of family sort of taking you into that non-league football? Was
Yeah.
you saying that your dad and that was involved in it? So
Yeah.
I mean, was that sort of the natural progression for you? Going with your dad
Yeah,
to
it
see
was
the games, yeah.
absolutely. And that, in the end, which was great because my father passed away, 2010. But in the end, my dad used to come with me then on the team coach, and we'd be into the boardroom. So, it went full circle really when he saw that, I had taken over the secretary, and then I became vice chairman, and he used to come with me then. So fortunately, dad, my father and I, together or apart, continued to watch Merthyr literally up until he died, which was probably just over 10 years ago. So there was never a time that we weren't going there. There was never a time where it sort of waned or fell off. We were sort of there. I can honestly say since I was a kid, I've been there every season, and I've never known anything different. I can't imagine a Saturday afternoon when I'm not watching football, be it non-league football mostly. And I can't imagine a time now on a Saturday afternoon when I'm not watching non-league football. It feels empty, to be quite frank. That's why the last year's been so difficult. Yeah.
I was going to say the last sort of 18 months must have been a nightmare.
Huge nightmare. Yeah. And listen, I had a few problems myself the year before. So 2 years ago this week, I was in hospital. I had pancreatic cancer, and I had my pancreas moved, I had my spleen removed. Came out of the blue in about the March that there was a lump in my pancreas. So I goes into hospital in June, have those taken out. I then start chemotherapy. So I'm doing chemotherapy then up until February 2020. March 2020, the lockdown comes in. So it's been virtually 2 years. Although during that time, I was still able to go and watch Merthyr and watch football on certain periods when I felt okay. But it's felt like almost 2 years now when I haven't been able to sort of get back to normal. And unfortunately, thank God, I'm back to normal. Everything's good. And so for the last year, I've been chomping at the bit. Can't wait to get out and about. And I'm ready to go now, if you like. I can't wait to get out and about now when the season starts. Yeah.
So I mean, we'll come back to that later. But I mean, go through your early stuff with Merthyr. I mean, tell us if you've got some funny stories that you can tell us, and is it stuff that's actually happened there in the beginning?
Everything went on at Merthyr. When I was a kid, it was quite a stable club, albeit not very successful, but a very stable club in terms of the club was run by local businessmen who became friends. And the secretary there at the time was a guy called Ken Tucker. Now, Ken Tucker had a full-time professional career, started with Merthyr, gone into the full-time game, played for Aston Villa, played for Cardiff, and had then come back to Merthyr because that's where he was from, took over as secretary, was secretary at Merthyr for years, and is now on the board of the Football Association of Wales, and has been for the past 30 years. So Ken was the secretary when I took over the turnstile. And so the club was very stable, very well run, very established as a Southern League club, because Merthyr had been in the Southern League virtually on and off since 1910. So, they're a club that were entrenched in the Southern League. And then as I got older, more prominent local businessmen became involved. The club became more successful, but it also became more volatile. And then we went through a period of when I was in my 20s and 30s, where the club changed hands a number of occasions and got into serious financial difficulties. And when I was in my early teens, Merthyr would be playing away on a Tuesday night. So they'd say, right, the bus is leaving at 4 o'clock and you travel on the team coach. And invariably, I might be the only supporter on there, if you like. So we're traveling up the Bromsgrove on a Tuesday night. And the Bromsgrove player manager was Bobby Hope, played for England. And as I'm getting off the coach in Bromsgrove, the manager, a guy called Doug Rosser from Swansea, says, listen, Alan Sullivan hasn't turned up tonight, so you're going to be sub. I said, pardon? He said, you're going to be sub tonight. So give me a scarf, he said. You can't take that into the ground. And he gave me a kit bag. So the next thing, I end up on the bench. I'm about 16, and Bobby Hope is running the show for Bromsgrove. To be fair, they won 2-0, and fortunately, I didn't have to come on because I was terrified. But then you get a little taste of that. Then, so 3 or 4 months later, the same thing happens in Alvechurch. And I'm going up on the coach, and Dougie says to me, listen, are you all right to be subbed tonight? And your name is Graham West, by the way, because obviously I haven't signed any forms. So your name is Graham West, and you're on the bench. Right, okay. I'm quite excited this time now, because I've done it once before. And now at the time at Alvechurch, you had... who eventually moved on, Alan Smith, who went on to Arsenal. Mm-hmm. And there was another guy up front by the name of Phil Harper. So the inevitable happens then at 25 minutes from the end. Merthyr get an injury and I have to go on. So I go on as left back. And this guy, Phil Harper, now I'm just under 17. This guy, Phil Harper, absolutely terrified me. He verbally told me what he was going to do to me if I interrupted him in any way, shape, or form. And let me tell you, I believed it, to be honest. And but it was a great experience. It was a great experience. Unfortunately, we lost again. But I couldn't wait then for the next time. And I ended up playing again then at Milton Keynes. Again, and this was my 18th birthday the night before. So I'd gone out the night before, enjoyed myself, safe to say, my 18th birthday. That was a Friday night. And on the Saturday morning, I go to get the coach to Milton Keynes as a supporter and get told that you're going to be subbed. So that was a tough day. And I hate to say it, but Milton Keynes hadn't won a game all season until that day. And they beat us 2-1. I played left back for 20 minutes again, and they carried the captain off the field on their shoulders because it was the first game of the season. So that was hilarious, to be honest. But I suppose the fun and games really took place. The fun and games really started when I took over as secretary. So Merthyr went through a long period of success. They went into what was then the conference. We had 6 great years in the conference, to be honest. We finished as high as 4th. And then, unfortunately, we were relegated. And we had marvellous times. You know, we played Darlington, Macclesfield, and we were having crowds of 2,500, 3,500. It was, you know, fantastic times, to be honest. We won the Welsh Cup as well and ended up going to play in the Europe. We went to Atalanta, played Atalanta at home, and then went out to Italy to play. And we were the first British club to play in Italy since Heysel. This was in 87. So there was an awful lot of publicity that came with it. You know, national publicity. We were, you know, the club from being a tiny club, you know, with no publicity, the club was on the back pages of every national newspaper and on every national news bulletin. St. Grevesy, if you remember, they came and filmed.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, suddenly, you know, we were in the spotlight and we had a great time, to be honest. But the upshot from that era was that the club got into financial difficulties. And that's when it became difficult. So you had a local businessman running the club at the time, a guy named John Reddy, who was you know, had a lot of positive things going for him, in fairness. But he could be a difficult character at times, like a lot of football chairmen. And we fell out a number of times. And the one thing I always remember, I can remember being in work one day and he rang me, and I can't even remember what the problem was, but he was ranting at me over the phone. I was a civil servant at the time, Dave, and I literally had to put the phone on the desk and let him carry on ranting. And the upshot was he banned me from the club. And it was something to do with the program. It was an article in the program, something like that. And the funny thing was, 48 hours later, he sold the club. So I was back in by the following week because the new owner was quite welcoming. So I was banned from there for about 72 hours, but that was it. So I fortunately I never missed a game, and I was back in. So then when the new owners took over, I got more heavily involved, and then I became secretary in 1999, and I loved that, to be honest. But again, the owner of the club was a guy who, again, had a lot of good things going for him, but he lived in Oxfordshire. And the club was very much a vehicle for him to get a housing development in Merthyr. And when that housing development was turned down, then he basically washed his hands of the club, and that was the most difficult time of the lot, because at that time, I felt I was the only person involved in the club really who had any love for it. Everybody else was there for other reasons, and they were washing their hands of things. So all the problems of, whereas they were concerned with the business side and everything else that was going on, like the clubhouse and everything else, there was no interest really when it came to the football team. So in terms of football debts, they weren't interested. And having to manage all of them myself was really difficult, really difficult. And that was a really tough time. And again, the worst part was, I thought, if I walk away here, this club will crumble. And that probably wasn't the case, but that's how you feel at that time. You think there's nobody going to step forward if you walk away. And that probably soured it a little bit for me, to the extent that we had, and this was the most bizarre time of the lot, we travel. So at the time, the current owner's trying to sell the club, and there's two parties interested. The current owner has rented the club, let the club go into the hands of another local business called Eugene Kaparos. So Eugene Kaparos takes over the club, and he brings in a guy called Eddie May as manager, who ended up as manager of Cardiff City. Before that, he was manager of Cardiff City, and a full-time pro throughout his life. So Eddie takes over from previous manager John Lewis, again an ex-Cardiff pro. Now, the current owners decide that the new owners are not doing a good enough job, so they come in and change the locks on a Friday night and reinstall John Lewis. Now, we're playing at Bath the following day, so we turn up for the coach at the football club at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Coach doesn't arrive. So then the previous owner comes and says, the coach has been cancelled because they've locked the club up and they want. So we all have to jump into cars and get to Bath. Now we turn up at Bath. I'm the only official from the club there, officially. But the two managers have come to take charge of the team. So somebody has to decide who's in charge of the team. So John Lewis takes over and Eddie May leaves Bath. He gets escorted off the ground, to be fair. And we lose the game. I'm driving out to the car park after the game, and a guy smashes his car straight into me right outside Twerton Park. So I've got three of the players in the car. The car is a write-off. So that day was a disaster. Go home on that day. Now, that was a Saturday. So we get back home eventually. On the Tuesday, Merthyr are due to play in Will in the FAW Premier Cup. So I have had a hire car and I'm in work, so I can't take the team coach. The team coach is leaving at 2, so I'm following up in the car at 4:30. I jump in the car at 4:30. I drive to Abergavenny, and there in Abergavenny is the team coach parked up. I think, what's going on here? Get outside, all the players are standing outside. The two owners are still arguing about who's in charge. And it's arguing about money. So they say, oh, well, unless we're guaranteed, that we're going to be able to play and get paid, we're not going to travel. So now at this time, this FAW Premier Cup was quite prominent in Wales, so it was televised live. Mm-hmm. So the BBC had a contract with the FAW to televise these games live. So by now, the BBC crew have turned up in the lay-by in Abergavenny, and they are filming this all, through the afternoon about the game that's supposed to be live tonight. We don't know if it's going ahead. We don't know if Merthyr are going to travel, etc., etc. So 4 of the players get off the bus, and we're left with 9 players. And I said, look, we've got to travel. So they say, okay, we'll travel. We'll go on ahead. So I drive on ahead to tell Rill, I mean, constant contact, but we sort of saying to Rill, look, they are coming. We're going to play the game. It's live, and we are going to. So I drive on ahead. And when I get to Rill, I park the car up, and somebody obviously said to him, oh, they're from Merthyr. So when I get out of the car, he thinks, the guy with the TV, that I am the guy who was owning it previously. So he's following me with a camera for about 25 minutes until the team bus arrives. Completely gets the story wrong. So it's going out on BBC TV that I'm this guy, Eugene Kaparos, who completely wrong. The team come. So we start with 9. It's televised live. We have a player sent off in the first half. So we're down to 8. And then another player arrives at half time, and we end up equalising in the second half. We drew 1-1 and came home. But those were the most bizarre 3 days I think I've ever had in the club. It was crazy. If a documentary crew had been following us around at that time, they'd have had a field day. So we had some really difficult times. And then the guy who took over was based in Oxfordshire and initially did a lot of good work in the club. Again, lost interest. And I thought, what are we going to do here? And the last week that I was secretary, what happened was we were due to play Farnborough on a Tuesday night. And they were travelling up. And I was speaking to Farnborough quite regularly. There was a guy called Steve Dooley who's been involved in non-league football who was there. And what had happened was the electricity had been cut off at the ground that morning. So I rang our chairman who's in Oxfordshire and says, look, I'm going to ring Farnborough and cancel the game this evening, as well as the league, because the electricity's been cut off. And he says to me, listen, don't cancel the game. We'll try and get it sorted, let them travel, and if their electricity's off, we'll tell them it's just gone off. So I said, I'm not prepared to do that. I'm going to tell them now. So I told them, look, the electricity's off, don't travel. Spoke to Dennis Frederick at the league, and they didn't travel. And that was my last day as secretary then. I got shown the door literally that afternoon. So, but shortly after, he left as well. And the club, what happened was a supporters trust was formed at Merthyr through Supporters Direct. And eventually what happened was that as a trust, we ended up putting the club into administration, really, because we felt that was the only way that we could sort of gain control of the club again, if you like. Mm. And that happened, and the club went into administration, and we did gain control of the club, and that was a good thing, but we had to play for a year in Cardiff. We thought we might lose the ground. They were trying to sell the ground off for residential. But fortunately, the ground happens to be the site of an old Roman fort, and the Welsh Historical Society, Cadw, got involved and said, sorry, you can't build houses on here. So they literally came back to us and said, look, please, will you take the ground back? And that's where we were very lucky, Dave, to be honest, because we would have really struggled to have found a home in Merthyr had that not happened. We were playing in Tapswell, which was about 22 miles away, but the ground would have needed an awful lot of work to be brought up to standard. So we started at step 6, having reformed the club. We started at step 6 in the Western League First Division, and the ground in Tapswell was fine for that level. But in order for us to progress, we would have to have found a new home. So having the club the ground handed back to us a year later, proved to be, a huge stroke of luck, and allowed us then to get back to where we were in the Southern League. So and primarily, those have been good times since. On the field we've been quite successful, and and we've got back to the level we were when the club went into administration. So it's been quite promising, really. The other thing that happened, of course, during my time at the club earlier was that the Football Association of Wales decided to form a League of Wales, a national league, which was admirable. But they then decided that everybody below Football League level would have to play in Wales. So they informed every club, and there was 8 of us at the time. They informed every club that we'd have to return to play in the Welsh system. And there was great, at the time we were in the conference. So we were playing a good standard, and the club was quite substantial at the time. We were having crowds of 1,500, 2,000. And we were fortunate. The 8 clubs took the case on, and a number of different outcomes came. And we were lucky enough that on appeal, we won the appeal because of the level we were playing at. So we were allowed to stay, but the others were forced to come back. So then you had the thing of Newport and at the time, Carnarvon Town, Colwyn Bay, taking the FAW to court. They won their case, so they were allowed to stay in the English system. But there were 5 other clubs besides that: Barry, Newtown, Rhyl, Carnarvon, and Bangor, who had all been playing in the Southern League or the Northern Premier League, and they were all forced back into the Welsh system, and they still currently play in the Welsh system now. So that was a difficult time. We had to do a lot of work to fight that, and that took up an awful lot of time and an awful lot of energy, to be honest. But we got there in the end. Whether Merthyr will ever go back to the Welsh system, I think probably they may well do. There may be a time when that does happen, because the one thing I will say is that the National League in Wales has become a much stronger competition. And I think, there may well become a time, and I never used to think this, so this won't be universally accepted in Merthyr, that's for sure. But, I suspect there will become a time when Merthyr will probably end up in the Welsh system. But when that will be up to the owners of the club, because as a supporters-run club, 75% of the owners would have to agree to any resolution for that to happen. So, it's not quite as straightforward as maybe it might look.
I mean, with that though, I mean, with the actual sort of the Welsh League itself, it's as you say, it seems to be quite strong, and you normally see the likes of, is it TNS that are normally the ones that are actually normally flying in that most of the time? They
are. I think part of the problem with it, Dave, is that the lure, obviously, of the National League is European football, and for the ordinary fan like us, European football is fantastic. You go and you see your team playing in Europe. It's a marvelous experience, and it's fantastic. But the other side of it is, if you qualify for any of the European competitions, financially the rewards are lucrative. So, and this is me looking on the outside in now. The problem I see with the Welsh Premier League at the moment is that the same clubs are generally qualifying for Europe, like TNS, like Corners Key, like Bala, those sort of clubs. And they are earning vast sums of money, whereas the other clubs at the bottom of the league, are not. And so the gap for me potentially could get bigger and bigger. Now, that's not happened at the moment, in fairness. It's been a really competitive league this year. But that would be my fear for it. And I as an outsider looking in, I wonder as an administrator whether there's mileage. I mean, you're talking of the likes of TNS and Corners Key earning between, it can be anything between 250,000 euros and €1 million. So, I mean, in terms of clubs at that level, that is just off the scale. And I just wondered if that money could be better shared throughout the league. I appreciate the clubs who qualify for Europe would have the expense of playing in it, and that's fair. And the majority of the prize money would go to them. but I still think there would be enough to filter some throughout the whole league. And I know that happens in some countries in Europe. So, you know, I just wonder if that would be a better way of strengthening the league as a whole. But what it also has done is raised the facilities and the standards in Wales, which is positive. And it's also raised the standards and facilities of the tier underneath. And again, that's a positive thing. So there's been a lot of good things with it. It's something I was vehemently opposed to at the time, but I think over time I can see, you know, the potential and perhaps the inevitability that Merthyr eventually may end up in that system. The pressure may come so severe that it, you know, and it might become the right thing for them to do in the end. You know, I don't know. I'd love to, you know, I'm a Southern League person and been all my life, so I'd be devastated to see them leave the Southern League. But ultimately, what's best for the club is best for the club.
And of course, with this extra competition coming in now as well, that's possibly more places as well that you know the Welsh league will get as well. I would assume, without knowing, you know, off the top of my head.
You're right. This conference is coming in. I assume you're right that there's a possibility of another qualification place. So I mean, in a league of 12, you know, you could potentially have a third of those clubs qualifying for Europe, which is, you know, is a huge incentive really. And you know, and listen, I've no doubt about it. The Welsh Football Association and the Welsh Premier League would love Merthyr to be involved. You know, in terms of clubs in Wales, Merthyr is still regarded as a big club in Wales. You know, in terms of attendances and infrastructure and the size of town, etc. So I think, you know, the FAW would love to have Merthyr involved. We did speak to the FAW. Sorry, we did speak to the FAW perhaps 2 years back about the possibility of Merthyr thinking about joining. And to be honest, if I'm being truthful, I was a little bit disappointed at the time that the FAW didn't make more of an effort to entice them in, because I just felt that with Merthyr being a fan-owned club, you know, the reality is 75% of the supporters had to be persuaded it was the right thing to do. So I think, you know, I don't think for one minute that Merthyr deserved to be put into the top tier. I think perhaps they probably would have been put into the second tier in the same way as Colwyn Bay were. And I think that was reasonable. But I think they could have done an awful lot more to try and incentivize and persuade the club to take the issue to the owners. And in the end, there wasn't enough in it for the board to take the decision to the owners to decide. And I thought that was a missed opportunity really for the Welsh Premier League and the Welsh FA. But you know, but ultimately, you know, all I am is an owner like everybody else. I'm not on the board at the club anymore, so I don't have any say. You know, my opinion means very little. You know, I deal with the club mainly now in my capacity as vice chairman of the Southern League, and I try the system is like every other club. So as much as I'm really interested in what goes on there, you know, other people are doing a really good job of running the club at the moment. So it's for them really primarily to decide where their future lies, I suppose.
You said, you know, you saying about before, you know, earlier on in the conversation around about the, you know, the European trip to Italy and stuff. I mean, did you go? And if you did, I mean, what was the experience? What was the experience like?
Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. It was a bizarre couple of days actually, because we at that time, which is 1987, so now you can fly quite easily to Bergamo where Atalanta were. But at the time, the closest flights were Milan and Turin. So our local supporters club did a number of options, mostly overland. So you went on coaches and travelled on the ferry and drove down there. So it took a day to get there. But ironically, what they did was they booked us in to a lovely hotel on the side of Lake Como. But Lake Como wasn't really prepared for 200 football fans. If I'm being brutally honest, I'm not quite sure the hotel or the area were actually fully prepared for the influx of Merthyr supporters. But listen, we had a fantastic time. You know, at that time, Ian Rush was at Juventus, and we met some Juventus fans who were also playing in Europe on the same day. We met them, and we were with them for 3 or 4 days, and listen, we had a fantastic time. And the experience of the game itself was phenomenal. We been taken in there and then sort of put into a cage, if you like, in the ground, because people were very wary of what the reception would be like because of Heysel and everything else. But it was the total opposite, you know. The Italians at the time, I think the Italians at the time found it quite strange that you could sort of appreciate and applaud your club even though you'd lost. It wasn't something I think they were used to. So by the time we got out to the stadium, you know, all the Atalanta fans were there waiting to clap and applaud us and swap scarves, and there was nothing but a nice atmosphere. You know, there was nothing intimidating, nothing volatile. It was nothing but a nice experience, and we had a fantastic time. And we've been back there a few times since. And 2 years ago, it was the 30th anniversary of the game. So at the time, I was at Merthyr. I was still involved with Merthyr on the board at the time. So myself and one of the guys working at the club, Martin, we went over to Atalanta and we got in touch with them, and they invited us over. We went to watch a game, and they gave us a tour of the place, and we had some photographs on the pitch, and you know, I think the locals were a bit bemused about who Merthyr was because it was 30 years ago. But we brought out the commemorative shirt as well at the time with the Atalanta badge on, which they allowed us to put on the shirt, and we wore it as an away kit for that season. And we have tried to get them back over for a pre-season game because they used to do a lot of their pre-season in the UK. They played in Swansea and Leicester on one occasion, but since then COVID's coming, it hasn't quite happened. So, but you know, the links are definitely still there. Yeah. And
did you ever get? Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say that the old clubhouse, the main room was called the Atalanta Suite. You know, so the links are still there. Yeah.
So, I mean, did you ever get to see the BT program of Corinthian Casuals when they went over to Corinthians?
To Brazil.
I mean, that was just and that's what just made me think that your story just reminded me of that, and that was
fantastic.
Just, I mean, that was just absolutely mad.
That is
completely mad.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
we played Corinthian Casuals in the FA Cup probably in the 80s when they were playing at Molesey, and so I know a fair bit about Corinthian Casuals, and I watched that. It was phenomenal. And there was the program then about Exeter afterwards, wasn't there? That Exeter had gone to Brazil and were one of the first teams to play Brazil, apparently, the national side when they were on tour there. But it's some fantastic stories when you look back years ago. Listen, you've got to keep those links alive, haven't you? You know,
absolutely. Yeah, and I'd say me own. I mean, the disappointing thing is that sort of, I say, my club beating Leicester in the FA Cup, but
I remember.
You can't get Leicester to actually even come over and do a friendly or anything. You know, which is a real shame.
Difficult.
You know, it's
difficult. Yeah, in fairness, do you know what? In fairness, and I have to give them some credit, Cardiff City played Chasetown in the FA Cup, and it was live on TV. And the two clubs have stayed closely linked to the point that when Cardiff City had their new stadium, Chasetown were the first team to play there against Cardiff. They invited Chasetown to open it. And Cardiff have done a fantastic job of keeping those links going, you know. And I know Mick Joyner from Mick Joyner from Chasetown is still in constant contact with Cardiff City now. And the stadium manager and goes down frequently for games. So it's lovely when those links, you know, it's important for clubs to remember, you know, the role of non-league clubs. I hate the word non-league, by the way. You know, the last thing we are is non-league. We all play in leagues. But I really wish that clubs would be more forthcoming with their local non-league clubs, to be honest, because the work that the clubs are now doing in the community is essential in terms of what the products that come through to the professional clubs at a later date. And as is the case in Merthyr, and not just Merthyr, throughout the country, all our academies now tend to be linked to the professional clubs as well. So the links are growing stronger. So you are right, it's more difficult. You know, the upshot, the funny thing was when Merthyr qualified for Europe in '87, there was an upshot from that. And the upshot was that a number of clubs in Europe decided they want to come and play Merthyr. So at that time, we had Red Star Belgrade come in, we had CSKA Moscow come in, the Maltese national team played us home and away. And it was incredible, really, how the profile of your club sort of raised from one game. It was amazing, really. And but when we used to play Cardiff pre-season, because Merthyr is primarily a Cardiff town, if you like, in terms of Cardiff or Swansea, you know, it would set us up for the whole season. You know, we'd make the best part of 20 to 25,000 pounds from one game pre-season, and that would allow Merthyr to continue for 3 or 4 months. So, you know, I'd love the league clubs to realise the impact they can make to their local non-league clubs just by giving up one day of their time. It can make a huge difference.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, people are sort of my age. You know, I mean, I look at the likes of Swansea, Wrexham, Cardiff, and then if someone was to ask me to put in the fourth team, it would probably be Merthyr Tydfil. But you know, because that's probably the name of the team that, as you said, around the Europe situation and all that.
Yeah.
But it was one of those teams that I think if you was to ask a lot of people around sort of my sort of age, they wouldn't necessarily say TNS or Bangor or teams like that, because
right.
they're probably not necessarily teams that they've. I don't mean this to be any disrespectful to those teams, but not necessarily teams that they've heard of other than possibly TNS. But it's that sort of thing where people would say name some Welsh sides. Probably Merthyr Tydfil would be one of the first ones that they would mention.
What's ironic, Dave, is that, and you can imagine what it's like in South Wales. Rugby is very prominent, obviously, right? But it's always been the case that more people play football than play rugby in South Wales. And, you know, it's always been a bit of a mystery, I suppose, to us, really, why football has taken such a back seat in Wales. But Merthyr itself has always been a football town. It's a strange one, really, because there are a lot of big rugby clubs based around it, and the rugby club in Merthyr itself has become quite prominent. But as a town, Merthyr's always been football orientated. Now, whether that dates back to the fact that Merthyr were in the Football League in the 20s, you know, but even going back, when after the Second World War, the club was invariably probably the most prominent non-league club in England and Wales. So they won the Southern League something like 5 times out of 8 and came second the other 3 seasons. So at that time, that was the most prominent non-league division in the country. And so Merthyr was probably should have got back into the Football League at that point, but because of the voting system, it never happened. And you know, there were crowds in Merthyr regularly of 10 or 15,000 watching the Southern League games. And I know that was probably the same in a lot of clubs at that time around the country. But Merthyr has very much been entrenched as a town in the local football club. So in terms of where we are now, we get 400 like a lot of clubs. But there has always been a hardcore of football supporters in Merthyr that have watched Merthyr and perhaps watched Merthyr and Cardiff, etc., alternative days, hopefully. And, you know, long may that continue. You know, I think Merthyr will always be a football town, to be quite frank.
So we've been involved with Merthyr. I mean, how did it come about yourself?
Yeah,
doing one of the jobs that I'd love to do myself, be the director on a league. I mean, how did that sort of happen? How did you jump from Merthyr into the league itself?
I've never even gave it a thought, Dave, to be quite frank. But like everything else, every year you'd go to the end of season dinner conference, and I'd represent the club there, obviously. And there was a guy who I knew who had been at Merthyr briefly in the 80s, a guy by the name of John Eastman. And John had been chairman of the Southern League, had left and gone abroad to live, and had come back to the country. He joined Taunton Town as a director and became involved in the league again. And John just happened to mention it to me one day. Look, have you thought about the league? I said, no, to be honest, I haven't. He said, well, there's a vacancy coming up if you're interested. Give Dennis Strudwick a ring, he'll let you know. So I rang Dennis and he filled me in, and I thought, oh yeah, might as well try for this. And two of us went for the post. Unfortunately, I won the election. So I joined the board then in 2004. And I've been there ever since, to be honest. I took to it straight away. At the time, the chairman of the league was Doug Gillard, who was involved heavily in football in Kent, and he was one of the strongest men I'd ever met. He had a big influence on me. I didn't know him well, but he could fight his corner, and it was at the time when probably views were very entrenched throughout football, and I couldn't believe the strength this guy had. The determination that he had, and but sadly, Doug passed away, and quite suddenly, and then Ken Turner took over, and I knew Ken quite well, carried on there, and then I had no intention of doing anything other than carrying on just being a director of the league. I was quite content, enjoyed it. And, and then 5 or 6 years ago, Terry Barrett, who was the director as well, decided to stand against Ken for chairman. And, none of us knew what to expect. But Terry won by a landslide. And at that point, John Eastman stood down as vice chairman because he'd served under Ken. And then I thought, well, do I put my name forward? So I thought, oh yeah, I might as well put my name forward. And fortunately, a year after, I was elected as vice chairman. So what had happened was in the first, I'm jumping ahead, sorry. When Terry Barrett took over, Brian McCarthy, I don't know if you know Brian McCarthy. Brian McCarthy's at Cheshire United. And Brian took over as vice chairman with Terry Barrett for a year. And during that year, we had to find an FA councillor because Ken Turner had been our FA councillor. Now, the rules of the FA Council, being the FA Council, said that if you are over 70, you can't become a new FA councillor. So Terry and our vice chairman, Brian, were ruled out on those grounds. So it came back to the board, and there were only two of us really who was age-wise eligible. And fortunately, I was elected again, and I became FA councillor. So that all came about in the space of about 6 weeks. Terry beat Ken to the chairmanship in the June, and by the end of July we had to appoint an FA councillor. So suddenly, from just being a director on the board, I was suddenly the league's FA councillor at Wembley. So that was a whole new experience, and the first year was a learning curve, but it was a tough experience because it just so happened that year the restructuring was taking place, and they were deciding who to award the 4th Step 3 Division to. So the Northern Premier League had requested that they would run it, and the Southern League had requested they would run it. So I had to take over that project, if you like. And I was a little bit naive, I'll be honest with you, but we ended up being awarded the 4th division in step 3. So that went well. And that sort of got my feet under the table, if you like. So within about a year or two, I felt a lot more comfortable at the FA. And the first year was difficult because you begin to realize, the politics and everything. and it wasn't something I was particularly comfortable with at the time, and thought, is this for me? Is it not for me? I wasn't sure, but I persevered. We won the award, as I say, the extra division at step 3, and then I began to enjoy it a lot more. You begin to know a lot more people, and I probably grew into it then over the following 2 years. And I feel now, very comfortable with how it's going and what we do, and the direction the league is going in. I've got, obviously we all think differently, don't we? And Terry Barrett has decided that this will be his last year as chairman of the league. So, I have hopes, hopefully, of taking over next year. But ultimately, anybody can stand. So you can't presume anything, that's for sure. But obviously, I have my own ideas, things I'd like to bring in and change if I may. I've been something what troubles me a little bit, and I've spoken to the chairman about it, is the composition of the board of the Southern League, because the clubs decide who the directors are, Dave. So the nominations come out in June, and club directors are eligible to put themselves forward to stand for the league board. Now, the problem we have at the moment is that we have 8 very good directors, but 7 of those come from 2 of the 4 divisions. And that doesn't seem appropriate to me. I think that every one of these 4 divisions need representation on the Southern League board. So we have a situation at the moment where there isn't one club in the Division 1 Central, that we call it, that has a representative on the Southern League board. Now, that for me can't continue. Eventually, I think we have to get to a stage where every division has representatives, ideally 2 from each division, from on the Southern League board. So there are, and we also have to get into this. We have to be more diverse. We have, we're lucky enough. We have a lady on the board, Pippa, who's fantastic. She's, proactive and a really good worker, and does an awful lot for the league. But we need to encourage a lot more diversity onto the board. We don't reflect, as a board, we don't reflect who's playing football in the Southern League. We don't reflect who's running clubs in the Southern League. And we have to try and find a way of persuading these people to come forward and stand for the Southern League board. And if not, we have to try and co-opt. I think, personally, eventually we'll have to go down that road probably. But, that's not the decision just for me. Everybody has to be on board with it. But those are my thoughts about how we need to progress as a league, But, for me, it's all about the clubs. As we run day to day, it has to be for the benefit of the clubs. The money we hold is the club's money. Everything we do must be for the benefit of the clubs. And, and Terry, in fairness, has steered the league in that direction so that the clubs are given far more of a say, are taken much more notice of, are taken much more into account. And I'd like to carry that on and perhaps take it a stage further if I get the chance.
Mm. So you're not putting yourself forward then to be the first Welshman in charge of the FA?
No. I think that's well above my pay grade. And listen, that's a difficult job.
I think you do a fantastic job personally, and as I said to you off air. But there we go. But, and it's one of those things. So, I mean, maybe you could explain. I mean, probably a lot of people that will watch this will know. Me being maybe a little bit naive on that side of it wouldn't know. But why is it then that we, if you want to be a director of the league, could there be people out there that would be fantastic to go on to your committee, but are not directors of the league, directors in their own club? So, like, for instance, say, if I use myself as a thing, I'd love to do something like that, because I'm not a director of any, on Harlow or anybody else. So that's always been my sort of thing, because I see it come up every year, and I'm just one of these, I don't know if they call me an old-fashioned anorak or whatever else.
Yeah, that's all I am.
I used to love going to the AGM for the East Mid League. I used to love going. Everybody else in my club didn't, not everybody, but most people in my club didn't like going to the end of season do. But for me, it was the highlight of the whole year. For me, I used to love going. Do you know what I mean? So it was one of those things, and and I'm not a drinker or nothing like that, but I just enjoyed
no,
it.
And we are two peas in the same pod, my friend. I'm exactly the same as you. I'm far from a drinker. I've never been able to drink, and I love all that. I love being involved in it. I love being involved at the end of seasons, and I love being involved in the AGM and the meetings. And listen, your point is a good one. At this moment in time, our rules allow a club secretary or a director or committee member to stand. Now, maybe those articles of association need to be looked at to allow other interested parties in football clubs to be able to stand for boards. The fact is we aren't getting people coming forward. This season, every year, 2 directors have to stand for re-election. And we've had no other nominations. So those 2 directors will automatically be re-elected. Good directors as they are, and they do a great job. But ideally, you want to see people coming forward. And I speak to people throughout the year, and I often drop the hint, look, are you interested? And most people will say, oh, look, I haven't got time for that, and I understand it completely. This is why we all talk about, don't we? Why are all the old guys doing the football? Well, the truth is that it's really difficult to do it when you're working. And that's why we end up with older people on these boards. That's the truth, probably. I retired at 55. It wasn't completely planned, but it's probably the best thing I've ever done. And now I find myself in a completely different world, because when I was working up until 55, I was FA councillor for 3 years that I was working. So my 6-week leave was entirely taken up with meetings at the FA. There were 30 odd days of meetings at the FA. So you couple that with the 10 board meetings at the league, and that was my year's leave taken up completely. So the family had to understand that I had no time for holidays or anything else, and they were willing to do that to support me. But when somebody's working, that's extremely difficult, especially if you've got young children and other things going on in your life. So what tends to happen is people in their later years decide, oh, I'll join, because they've got the time to do it. And that's where this is where sometimes the criticism, I think, is a little unfair, because the amount of work that goes into running the league or running the FA or anything else is massive. There's so much going on, not just the running of the football, but the sponsorship, finding the funds to fund the league and everything else. There's an awful lot of work involved. But
so do you think? Sorry, Andy, do you think now with Corona? Yeah, do you think now with coronavirus, if as bad as it's been, across the world, sort of on that sort of note, would make things easier now, because everybody's got used to these Zoom meetings, everybody's got used to that, everybody's got used to it. Do you feel that would now maybe make or encourage more younger people to come onto the boards of the Southern League, Northern League, Isthmian League and stuff, because they can use Zoom if they can't be there in person?
I hope so, to be honest. And you're absolutely right. I think the biggest disappointment this year, I don't mean this unkindly to the 2 guys that are standing for re-election, but as a league, we were bitterly disappointed that nobody put themselves forward this year. Every position of the Southern League that will come up at the AGM on the 26th of June, everybody will be re-elected, because there were no other candidates from any of the 80-odd clubs. And that's really disappointing for me. Now, some clubs will find it difficult, because there may have been 1 or 2 people who were considering standing and they've ended up being moved into another league. And that, yeah, I get that completely, But yes, I think looking forward, and we've spoken about this as a league, and I'm sure the FA are thinking the same. For example, Dave, I'd go to we'd have a meeting at the FA, and invariably the meetings at the FA at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. So what would happen is I would jump in my car at 8 o'clock in the night. For my own preference, I would drive up to Wembley the night before. I'd stay there ready for the meeting at 10 o'clock. We'd have the meeting for 2 or 3 hours. I would drive back, taking me the best part of 24 hours. Now I get up in the morning, I sit in front of the computer for 2.5 hours, and the meeting is done. besides the expenses that haven't been incurred, you think that in the course of the whole of the FA or in the terms of the league, and the amount of money that's been saved is phenomenal. So we have to look at trying to incorporate these meetings as well. I think it would be crazy to be going back to what we did before. My fear is that people will soon forget and will go back to what they were doing before. But I think we have to incorporate these sort of meetings, and we've decided already at the league that the minimum of meetings by Zoom will be 50% and maybe more. But the opportunity that it gives you to liaise with your clubs is so much better. When in the past, we wouldn't have thought of having a Zoom meeting with all our clubs. We would hold an AGM in June, and then in November, we would have regional meetings and invite 12 of the clubs to 6 meetings, one a week. Now, I can get a Zoom meeting with all the clubs in virtually 2 days' notice. There isn't any reason for us to be communicating with the clubs, not to be communicating with the clubs more regularly. We can talk to them at the drop of a hat now, so there's no excuse anymore to say, oh, it's difficult to organise a meeting with all the clubs. It's difficult for this time. This has changed the world in terms of the way that we deal with the clubs as far as I'm concerned. And I think we have to carry on doing that. So in answer to your question, I'd love to think that the advent of Zoom would enable people to find more time to be able to do league work. Let's hope that that would be a fantastic bit of good news to come out of what's been horrendous, probably 12 months. But it would be fantastic if that was the case. Because, as you say, even if there's a meeting face-to-face and people want to travel, that doesn't mean to say you can't join that meeting by Zoom. So, it doesn't have to be that you're all on Zoom, that's for sure.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
The opportunities are there, and we got to try and embrace them and try and involve and engage as many people at the clubs as we can. But the one thing you've said, which has made me think, is there a way that we can change the articles that will allow people who are not directors of individual clubs to stand for the board of directors? And that's something I'll take forward and have a think about. I don't know the answer to it, but it's certainly something that intrigues me.
And it's always something that I've always said, and I think I get frustrated a lot, me personally, is that I feel that, and I'm just talking about myself, and there's probably other people out there that might be feeling exactly the same, that got a lot to give to non-league football, but there seems to be barriers that stops you from being able to do that. I mean, I know when we first started doing the show, and we first started doing the show by Zoom, I was told by somebody very high up that, it's unprofessional, it's not very good, it doesn't look great, etc., etc. Now, and my answer to that was, well, Sky Sports are doing it, BT Sports are doing it, this one's doing it. Right. Now everybody's doing it. Do you know what I mean? So all of a sudden, what we were doing 2 years ago, all of a sudden now everybody's doing it, and everybody thinks it's absolutely fantastic. So it's it's frustrating, because you do feel that you can give a lot more, but you just want that to be seen, and not just from me, but from everybody as well. So it's that is a difficult. There's barriers.
There's a massive army of enthusiasts that we need to tap into. We are, we've done a sponsorship deal with Pitching In over the last year, and they are sponsoring again next year. And we are in the process of trying to set up a scheme to try and encourage volunteers to come on board with their local clubs. I know everybody's trying to do that, but we've got the stage now where the volunteers are as crucial to clubs as money, and perhaps even more so. And we have to try and find a way of getting people engaged with the clubs. I think the clubs are doing their bit, Dave, because when I grew up, Merthyr had a first team and a reserve team that played in the local Welsh League, and that was it. The only way you'd get onto Penderyn Park was if your school got to the local cup final, the town schools cup final. But now you know, there are teams of all age groups, walking football, ladies football, girls football, all age groups. And so clubs are doing an awful lot more than they ever did before in terms of integrating into their local areas and getting the community people involved. But we have to tap into that resource really to get them involved. Because some of the, you know, we've got clubs that are relying on one or two people to keep them going, you know, and it's and invariably it's an aging volunteer force. So, you know, the more people we get involved, the better, really. And that's going to be a huge part of what we do going forward over the next 5 years, I think. I think that's going to play a huge part.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yourself though, I mean, I know we know you started off the conversation saying that you'd been unwell for a period of time. I mean, I'm not asking you to talk about it because I don't want to take you back to dark times. But I mean, everything feeling perfectly okay now.
Yeah, great.
I was back to 100%.
I've been very lucky. You know, I've been very lucky. Yeah, absolutely, Dave. And I've been very fortunate. You know, that apart from getting over the treatment, I haven't been ill at all. You know, they happened to find this by chance that there was something there, so they decided to go in and take it away. Apart from recovering from the operation and then the chemo, I haven't been unwell at all. I've been very, very fortunate, and I feel absolutely tip top. Yeah, I feel as though it never happened really, and until somebody tells me any different, I will be carrying on as normal. So I go for scans every 3 months and those things, but thank God at the moment everything is really, really good, and I can't wait to get going. I'm checking the dates now of all the pre-season friendlies. I can't wait to get up.
I was actually looking at myself and the Harlow ones. And one of the first home games of Harlow, my brother's getting married, and it's like, you're having a laugh.
Yeah. Actually, the other
there
thing,
we go.
The other thing we've just done as the three leagues is pitching in have decided we're in a unique situation this year, Dave, that we have the Vase winners and the trophy winners. So
yeah.
we're having a Challenge Cup game on the 7th of August at Hornchurch, between Hornchurch and Warrington Rylands. So that'll be a good day. I'm looking forward to that, to be honest. And
that's going to be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a unique experience for us. So, you know, we've got to take advantage of that, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I saw that, I thought, what a fantastic,
it's a good
fantastic
idea.
thing to start up and get going. Because that's what, you know, why shouldn't there be that competition? Because as I said, two fantastic games this year. When I dare say you probably was there, but it was two fantastic games, and of course to see the Hornchurch boys, you know, more than, you know, no disrespect to the other guys, but you know, Hornchurch very close to where I am, and you know, and we had them on the show a few times, and you know, fantastic to see them do that. And even when they went 1-0 down, I expected them still to win.
No, listen, second half, it was fantastic, wasn't it? And then it was funny because you know what it's like at Wembley at the moment. You're sitting on your own, but a couple of seats from me was Max, the announcer at Hornchurch, who I had a chat with, because a friend of mine played at Hornchurch a number of years ago. So we were talking about him, and the emotion from Max was incredible at the end. He was in all sorts of trouble, let me tell you. He was in all sorts of trouble at the end. But it was a lovely day, yeah, it was great.
I mean, I know the feeling. I mean, we were sitting here and you could see him, you know, enjoyed it so much. And we'd had Tony and all the boys. But last show we did, we had all the boys on the show and all the rest of it. There's been about 7 or 8 of them on the show as well. And you could feel a little tear in your eye, you know, when that went, because it was just incredible.
It was so emotional for them, you know. They've gone through dark times as well, haven't they? So as a club, and you could see how much it meant to them, and they thoroughly deserved it on the day.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Anthony, listen, I know you're a busy man, and I can honestly say that I'm sitting here and I could sit and talk to you all day and all next week without stopping, because you're an absolute fantastic gentleman to talk to, and really appreciate you giving up your time for us. And hopefully, especially during the season now, we can get you on the show as well, and it'd be fantastic to have you back on there as well. And hopefully, at some point, get to meet each other in person as
Yeah,
well.
for sure. Absolutely.
That would be fantastic. But
yeah,
a massive thank you to you. And of course, if there's anybody else that you'd like to hear their story in football, and I'll speak to Anthony afterwards as well. If there's anybody from the Southern League, Northern League, Isthmian League that would like to come on and tell their story, their life in non-league football, then please give us a contact via social media, and we'd love to have a little chat with you, because I love doing these shows and learning more and more about different clubs, different people. It'll be fantastic. But until the next time, a massive thank you to Anthony, to everybody that's watching, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Dave.